Good evening, members. I'm Councillor Alan Bartlett, the Chairman of the Corporate Services Policy Advisory Committee, and I am pleased to welcome you all to the committee this evening. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anybody else be recording proceedings? No, okay. I ask the people at the meeting will know if this is happening, not to stop people. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. So we move on to item 1. I haven't received any apologies, but I noticed that Councillor Cannon and Councillor Cook aren't here, but we'll press on and hopefully they'll arrive at some point. Item 2, substitute members. There are no substitute members. So item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 4, notification of visiting members. There are no visiting members. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? No, okay, excellent. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No, okay. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'd like to move that all items be taken in public as proposed. Is this agreed? Agreed, thank you. Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July 2023, pages 1 to 7. I'd like to move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point, really, but I noticed 180 apologies for absence received from Councillor Cook. Councillor Cook isn't down as a committee member on the minutes.
I think, yeah, he's on the committee. I think he's not down there because he wasn't at the meeting. So that list at the top there is just for the people that did attend. Councillor Webb.
Thank you. Item under point 27, which is the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan. The rather long paragraph on page 3, the second paragraph down, were the points that I brought up at that meeting. I made 2 requests, having put those details down, because I asked the officer to go away and come back before this meeting with either information on an update of the Biodiversity Action Plan or reasons why not. Now, as I said at the time, because I do want to make this point really strongly, that a year ago I was not happy with that plan. Last meeting I was really more unhappy with the plan because it is an uncoordinated action plan. An action plan should be specific, it should be measurable, it should be achievable, and the targets that are set can be evaluated on a regular basis. That action plan has none of that. It's worse than War and Peace. Now, how many times do I have to sit here in this cabinet, sorry, I beg your pardon, in this committee meeting and ask why I have not had a response from this officer? I have raised this in different quarters. I'm not going to embarrass people here tonight, but this is really important that if a member of this council raises queries with officers, that they are, out of courtesy, they should come back, either to say we're working on it, councillor, or whatever. So through you, Chair, I'm going to task the Cabinet member, Mr. Perry, to take on board what I've said tonight and to come back to me with an update on this action plan, because I note in the expenditure this year, we're spending money on this action plan. We're appointing people. Why? Because if the action plan isn't in place, if it isn't a smart action plan, we shouldn't be touching it with a barge pole, because otherwise we're just throwing money against something that can't be measured or evaluated or have an outcome. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, just for clarification, are you saying that your request should be in the minutes from the previous meeting, or is this sort of a further request?
Am I saying? Well, I'm clear that I made that request at the last meeting, but what I'm not really fussed whether the minutes changed or not. I don't mind if that's the process, because I don't want to embarrass the clerk. If that is the process, then please amend the minutes to say that's what I asked. I mean, if there are other committee members who heard what I said at the time, then please, support that amendment. But my request from the missing information is very clear. I need someone with responsibility, that happens to be the cabinet member sitting across the way, to take this away and either come back to me before the next committee meeting or come back to this committee meeting the next time it sits with answers to my queries about this action plan. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, the only query we've got, Councillor Webb, is that this particular point is to do with the accuracy of the minutes. So if you don't want the minutes changed, we can sort of say that these are accurate and then cover it within the forward plan if that's acceptable. Or do you want the minutes changed?
I think on that note, then, if it's acceptable, Chair, I would like the minutes changed to reflect the request that I made.
That's fine.
How I can follow that through when there aren't any matters arising from the minutes, how do I do that?
So we cover that in the next section. Can we just? Yeah, on the actual request. So, yeah, please, yeah.
No, it's okay. So I have to be honest and say that I wasn't at the last meeting, but from describing your description of the request, I do have some suggested wording if the committee would like to take that on board. So I'll put that forward first if that's okay, and then I'll deal with the procedural sort of aspect. So the wording that I've suggested, we could add in: a request was made for the Biodiversity and Climate Change Manager to provide further information on the plan's progress outside of the meeting, and if this was not possible, to provide a reason why. And in terms of making the request on having that information, generally if a request is made in a meeting, the Democratic Services Officer will just follow up with the officer, and that will be sent out to the committee just via email. That's generally how we manage those requests.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Gooch, and then I've got Councillor Harper.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. Thank you very much. On this matter, on this particular item, I appreciate this is on the accuracy of the minutes. However, the point that Councillor Webb has raised is a very critical one, because I distinctly remember both at this PAC meeting, it may have been another PAC meeting, and at full council, this was raised, the issue of the Biodiversity Action Plan being mammoth, with no priority, no guidance, no nothing. And it was a point that was very clearly raised that we wanted to see something that was timed and prioritised. Because I seem to remember the decision was that any proposals, a lot of proposals would have to be subject to external funding. So I remember that bit, but it still had no shape. And I can remember when Councillor Webb brought it up, I thought to myself, he's dead right, because I brought this up myself. We're swimming in a massive information. And it's a shame, because the actual plan itself, as well as being voluminous, if that's a word, it was very detailed, it was very thorough. But that's it. It had no clear direction of travel with no prioritisation. So I really do support what Councillor Webb is saying. And I do rely on you on how the hell do we deal with it procedurally. Thank you.
Yes, just for the record, my queries were just procedure. They weren't with what you were saying. So I've got Councillor Harper next, please.
I agree with what Faye and Captain Simon have said. Is that this was one of our, when we started looking at this report at the previous meeting, we were looking at the trees and all the individual items. And was it, remember, 49 of them? I can't remember the precise number now. There's a lot of it, and we were going through sort of item by item. And actually, Simon did a good thing for us because he actually brought us back and to actually look at the wood, to actually step above it. And then we had a really good discussion. And that last bullet point was the second bullet point on page 3, and then the one underneath going on about concerns are expressed, to some extent encapsulated that discussion. And that was what the bulk of, in the end, the main and probably the more important part of the discussion was actually about. And I know that when we came to make a decision to the Cabinet, we were trying to work out, I'm sure, and I can't remember the precise wording at the time, but a way of trying to incorporate those concerns into our recommendation to the Cabinet. And in stronger terms, I would suggest, than just if we look at what's on minute 1, recommendation and that implementation of the action plan be expedited selectively. I thought we were sort of, asking for more. So I'm just wondering whether that minute, as is written on the recommendation, really reflects the nature of the discussion we had. Now, the only way we're going to know that is obviously someone listening to the webcast, because none of us are going to remember verbatim the type of stuff which was done a month ago. But I do seriously think we should look at this minute, and perhaps the way forward is for perhaps the chair and the officer to listen to the webcast again and then confirm with all of the members of the committee precisely what the outcome of that discussion was. That can be done prior, if you like, to our next meeting, because if we do need to change the minute, we can't really do it tonight because we haven't got the information before us, but that we could then put in the relevant change at that meeting once, I say, you've had a chance to do that review, because without that, unless we suspend the meeting now for you to go listen to the webcast, which is probably not the best use of anyone's time, I don't know how we can take this forward. But and Faye's right, I raised this at the following council meeting about a week or so later, and David Burton was quite clear that he was supportive of us doing this, or he was not nodding his head off. So yeah, I do think there might be something here. Okay.
Sorry, within the minutes, underneath the paragraph, it's got resolved to recommend to the Cabinet. Are we saying that that bit is wrong? Is that?
I think what I'm saying is we can't, right. We remember the type of meeting we had and the type of discussion we had. I think there's a feeling from at least 3 of us that perhaps what we ultimately, happened last time, didn't it? What we ultimately decided was stronger than what is reflected here. The trouble is, we only sort of, the agenda only comes out very shortly before the meeting, so it becomes difficult to question it prior to this. But I just wonder if that is accurate.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Olivia to make a suggestion.
Thank you, Chairman. So, members, if you're, as a committee, if you're not entirely happy with the minute, then what I would advise that we do is that essentially you defer approving the minutes until the next meeting, and then that gives us a chance to go away, review the webcast, review the previous notes as we keep those until they're approved, and then we can just double check the issues raised by the committee this evening, and then come back with sort of proposed amendments. Would that be suitable to members?
I think, yeah. I would. So is that agreed then, members? We'll review them and we'll defer it. Excellent, thank you. So item 9, forward plan relating to the committee's terms of reference. Are there any comments on the forward plan? Which again, this is where we discuss it. So if you wanted to sort of go further, Councillor Webb, this is where we could discuss this. And do you have any comments on this?
Biodiversity action plan isn't on the forward plan. So, no.
Councillor Perry, I'm going to ask if you could sort of comment on, because it's not in the forward plan, but whether it could be added to the forward plan, or discuss if you've got any comments on this, and then I'll come to other councillors.
Thank you. I don't have much comment. If you want to put in the forward plan, it's fine by me, or recommend it to be put in the forward plan. I was just looking at the minutes now. I was present at the last meeting, and I do remember there was quite a wide-ranging discussion, very wide-ranging. I think everybody made a contribution to it. So, and I thought the minutes reflected that, actually, if I stand to be corrected. But if you want to amend the forward plan, that's fine by me. I don't have a problem with that. And I'll pursue this matter raised by Councillor Webb as well.
Excellent, thank you. And could any sort of outcome of any discussions be circulated to all members of the committee so we can all see what is happening? Because as I agree with this, I've got Councillor Harper first, then I'll come to you, Councillor Webb.
Should we? I mean, John's agreed to put in an item in the forward plan about the biodiversity strategy. I think presumably we're asked to note this report. We should perhaps note it and look forward to a report before the end of the calendar year on the biodiversity action plan, in light of the discussions we had at our last meeting, because without going back through it again, it was very clear we wanted to see some more flesh on that. And later on tonight, we're being asked, again, as was pointed out, to appoint a couple of extra people to do work around the biodiversity plan. Now, I suspect the fact is that we're not resourced to deliver the biodiversity plan because there's so much in it, and this is why we're now starting to have proposals coming forward to have, at this stage, 2 extra officers. Now, yeah, without understanding the whole thing in terms of some of the issues we were sort of raising, would even the extra 2 officers proposed, I think, later in the sort of budget thing, be enough? Because 2030, when we're supposed to be carbon neutral, we're now halfway through 2023. You know, it's like tomorrow, isn't it? I mean, it might be if we had 100 extra staff, we'd only just achieved carbon neutrality in 6 years, six and a half years time. But I think I think so. We need to add in the minute for that item that we look forward to a report on the biodiversity action plan before the end of the calendar year. We've got a couple of cycles that you can come back to us on.
Councillor Webb?
Yes, I mean, I would agree with most of what Councillor Harper has said. I do want that biodiversity action plan to come back here so that we can debate it, because it's the only place we can debate it, apart from full council, and that's too late by that point. And I don't agree with him that we should be employing loads of officers for that policy, because the policy hasn't been agreed yet, or isn't right in terms of what a policy should portray for this council. So, I mean, I'm happy to leave it at that. I'm ambivalent whether it goes in the forward plan or not. I think if we have an acknowledgement from Councillor Perry that we have that he will pick this up as well as corporate services, then I'm content with that.
So yeah, I'm going to come to you, Councillor Perry. Would possibly something in the agenda for the next meeting of this committee, could something be added on the biodiversity plan? You come back to us with more detail and the answers to Councillor Webb's queries. Is that something that would be possible?
I'm not sure it's for me to decide what goes in your agenda. That's for you to decide. But I just wanted to come back to what Councillor Harper said, which I actually totally agree, to be honest. I think the right approach is to have something in the minutes, which then we can action. That seems to me the right process. I just wanted to point out that on page 3 of the minutes, towards the top, after the last bullet point, there's a very good paragraph, I think. And these words were, I think, summed up quite well my recollection. I say it's my recollection of what was discussed at the PAC, and also reflected what was raised at the council meeting. So I think that it is very important also to bear in mind. And I think the prioritization, the getting actions that we can do are very important. And I think this paragraph is a very well drafted, if I may say, paragraph. So I think it reflects what I understood came out of a very wide-ranging discussion. But I'm happy to support Councillor. Well, it's not for me to support, but I think what Councillor Harper suggested was the right process and approach. Thank you.
Okay.
With respect, Councillor Perry, I think you're missing the complete point I'm making about this plan. By all means, the council can do what it wishes in terms of employing people for a plan, and especially how important the biodiversity action plan is. My whole point is, if this plan is not smart, if this plan does not give key evaluations on progress made against targets, then we are wasting money for those people who have been employed to do a job of work. Because as councillors, we won't be able to ask questions of cabinet member targets against or progress, because having read that biodiversity plan at least twice and been totally confused on what progress is likely to be, I'm concerned that we've gone ahead and made 2 appointments, and these officers are now working to what I don't know, to what evaluation I don't know, and to what progress I don't know. That's why I am emphasising the point that that plan has got to be right if, as councillors, we scrutinise the action plan. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. I do agree with Councillor Webb here. I think we do need sort of something, these points answered. So is it right that it's Councillor? Oh, yes, please do.
Can I formally move that we adopt or we note the forward plan as submitted, but that we request an update on the biodiversity plan with regards to the points we mentioned at our last meeting. Yeah, I think John knows what we're talking about, and I'm sure he'll make sure that's done. So that's what I'm suggesting, because I also think when we do come on to the budget stuff, I don't think those two posts, until we've had that, can really be approved. Stuff on page 75, anyway, that's a later debate.
I think that's quite a sensible proposal, so I'm happy to second that. Is that agreed, members? Yeah, agreed. Excellent. Thank you. On to item 10, first quarter finance performance and risk monitoring report. I'd like to call on Councillor Perry, the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Well, the Corporate Service Pack obviously has responsibility for the services within its remit, but it also, in my view, it has overall responsibility for the finances of the council as a whole. And I want to say right from the start that I think we're very fortunate to have a very strong financial team of officers supporting us. I think this is absolutely fundamental, and I hope you as a pack will give them the same support. Turning to agenda item 10 itself, it's split into a number of different sections, and it's quite a long paper. And some of us I know only got it today, so it's not an easy read. But nevertheless, if you go to Appendix 1, which I think probably covers a lot of the meat of the paper, it shows a forecast overspend of, this is for the council as a whole, just over $250,000 for this financial year. And this is and it takes into account some swings and roundabouts here, because they're clearly, and I'll come back to this, how housing is a main issue, particularly temporary accommodation, and this will keep cropping up quite a lot, I think. We're talking a very significant figure here, about 800,000. But it is offset by savings, particularly in our area, actually. Some of it due to the slippage of capital spend, which again come back to, but also increase in other income, particularly interest earned, for example, where clearly the higher interest rates make a bigger effect. So there are swings and roundabouts, but at the end of the day, we are going to have to look possibly, and it is early days. So, I mean, we're talking Q1 here. So, but it looks like there will be an overspend this year, which we'll have to find, obviously, when we're carrying forward into next year with our balanced budget. If we then look at some of the other services in it, there are variances again. If you go to tables 3.2 in Appendix 1, you'll see analysis of variances, some variances, key variances, if you like. And that includes, for instance, an example, Maidstone House, which is it's fallen a little bit behind schedule. This is no criticism. These things are not always as straightforward. There are issues that are not totally within our control, but clearly we haven't got quite the rent that we were expecting originally forecasting. So that is a genuine cost. As I said, there is a capital investment slippage as well, and these obviously do have an effect on the variances. We shall need, because we're going to end up possibly in a small deficit situation, then we will need to monitor this very carefully throughout the year. This is pretty fundamental. It's your job here on the PAC. It's my job as the cabinet member as well, and clearly Mark and his team we have supporting us to do that. And I am confident that we can make those savings, but we'll come back to that as well. Looking at some other points on the paper, you'll notice, and it's quite an interesting one, there's there's a list of virements, and there's a couple of permanent virements. One is to do with a Gypsy Traveller site manager, which has been taken from the caravans, another caravan site in Marden. So that's an interesting one. And there's also the homeless prevention reserve, which again is being used to fund housing inclusion. So there's a couple of permanent virements there that are interesting. If you turn to page 81, sorry, page 32, you'll see in B1, appendix B1, again, there's some capital expenditure here on the 1,000 affordable homes program, which is again is a slippage, and I do have a little few concerns about this, because I think this is such an important program that we've got to make sure that it's properly funded and that it doesn't slip. But it is very difficult when you're looking at property acquisitions, and it's a theme that will come through on the capital expenditure. The performance monitoring is pretty good. We meet our targets in our area, certainly in corporate services. They're mainly to do with council tax recovery, and that is pretty good. And I think the team, Mark and his team, and the whole crew deserve a pat on the back for this one, because it's a it's a good result. However, I think you need to look at the fact that in other areas there has been some slippage here again, and some of the targets have not been met. So we need again to carefully monitor that, and clearly the other packs will have this on their own agenda to do. But we need to bear in mind that it's not completely plain sailing on this one. Turning to the reserves, there's a whole section here on the reserves. Reserves are absolutely crucial, in my view. We are currently got allocated specific reserves of 19.8 million, and we've got unallocated general reserves 11.6 million. Now, having a strong balance sheet is extremely important in terms of judging the financial position of this council, and we do have a strong balance sheet, and that is very, very important. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It is extremely important. The 11.6 million may seem a large figure, but actually it's about 22% of our total expenditure, and that is within a reasonable, normal situation. But it is a very good position, and we have a very strong balance sheet. We have a very liquid situation with cash, so we're not going to run out of money there either. So I just wanted to put that into emphasis very much so. And one thing I want to avoid, and you've seen one or two things in the news about Section 114 situations, and we're miles and light years away from a Section 114 here, and long may it be so. And I can tell you the road is paved with local councils who've taken short-term solutions to try and make their figures and their council tax look better than it really is. And they've fallen flat on their faces. And there's a load of them who've done that. And the last thing I want to see is this council getting into that very bad financial position. Treasury, again, we take a prudent approach. We follow very closely the CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accounting. Their guidance is a very important guidance. It's one that's pretty well nationally recognized. We follow that. We take a prudent approach. We've done some very good negotiations in terms of our borrowing. To keep our borrowing low, we negotiated something pre the inflation that it means that some first 80 million, I think, of our financial borrowing was at a very low and competitive rate. So we have done very well, but our treasury function, we again take a prudent approach. This is reflected in these figures here, I think. Risk is always I don't think a lot has changed on risk. we know what the financial situation is. It's it is volatile. We know that, and it is very difficult. I think there are some areas where it is pretty difficult to control, really, in terms. A lot of it is outside control, where the costs of our construction costs, the council's various other services are very difficult. We know that, but we're doing our best to mitigate and control the risk as it is. So they're the main points I think I wanted to raise under this. It is, I think, certainly from the corporate services point of view, I think it's a reasonably good position to be in. Overall, we're going to have, it looks as if and again, I say it is early stage, but it looks like we're going to have to find an extra 270 odd thousand to find for what could be a possible deficit at the end of the year. I believe that is doable, and we'll come on to that under the next agenda item when we look at the 5-year forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Before I move on to the debate, so I just have to ask Councillor Cannon if there are any disclosures or disclosures of lobbying.
Thank you, Chairman. No.
Right, lovely, thank you. Right, moving on to debate. I had Councillor Harper, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was someone else mentioned. I mean, these papers only came around earlier on today, so it wasn't easy. You couldn't really understand this looking on the computer screen. So I've tried to speed read this earlier on, so correct any of the points I might ask. But I agree, I think, with what John was saying. We've got to be, we do have a prudent approach to finance. We're served by very good officers, as we have been for a very long period of time. And I'm sure that, the £250,000 overspend will be discussed in the next item. I've got some quite detailed questions on what we've got before us, which starts on page 26. Well, basically on the pages 28 through to 33. And the first, if I do them in bits, because some are on the variances and the varments, then a couple on the capital, and then on the risks. So probably easier to split the questions for Mark into those bits. So looking at the variances starting on page 28, in the first one there is Sandling Road, and I was just trying to understand. I assume that we've got higher vacancies than we thought we would do, because that seems to me to from my reading of it, what's leading to the forecast sort of deficit. And there's high tenant vacancies. And then on the second to last one, which was the Archbishop's Palace, I suppose my question was, we always knew that Kent County Council was going to, move out, and that the lease was going to come back to us. And at that point, we hadn't got any definite plans in terms of anyone else taking the site on. We had that discussion about, potentially it could have been Hush Breweries, but that was all at an early stage. So we must have known that for somewhat all of the current financial year, we wouldn't be getting an income. So I was just a bit surprised to see that variance coming through, because I would have thought it should have been included in the budget. And actually, the next one down is linked to Granada House. And again, I'm just surprised that we hadn't put in for not getting renting when the site was being emptied out as part of a program to refurbish it. So it's like we agreed a capital program to spend X millions or whatever it was on Granada House, which is fine. But then on the other side, we hadn't realised it would mean there'd be no one living there to pay the rent. But unless, as a layman, that might not be the case, but that's what it struck me as looking at it. And on the varments for our committee, I just noticed there was a 30,000, I think it's Yeah, £32,000 overspend on KCC elections. Now, I assume that has to be the cost of the Maidstone Central by-election we had a couple of months ago, because I can't see why else would be overspent on KCC elections in the current year, since there haven't been any other than that. It just surprised me that was quite a lot of money. And I thought we could recover it from Kent County Council. And then on the environment, it's the same thing. On those permanent ones you referred to, John, so this is on page 31, the last two items there. So the traveller site manager and then posts in housing and inclusion. Given that we're only at the end of Q1, were these posts not seen as coming forward, and shouldn't they have been in the base budget at that time? It seems to me odd that, if you like, in the first couple of months of a year, we've created new posts when we have a whole budgetary process which starts 6 months prior to a budget to look at what growth items there might be. Because if I was being disingenuous, I would say this is growth by the back door. We didn't put them in the budget, but we need these posts, and we found environment to pay for them. But I say that might be slightly disingenuous. So those are my points on revenue. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything before I go on to capital.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. I'll go through your questions in turn. The first one about Sandling Road, you're right. The bigger element, though, of the variance was to do with utilities, where we've had some catching up to do in billing our tenants, and we're not 100% confident of being able to recover all of the utilities costs through service charges. But the explanation is basically as per the papers. On both Archbishop's Palace and Granada House, you're right that these items are ones that could have been anticipated, but going back to when the budget was set last year, I think we were probably more optimistic than in retrospect we should have been about how quickly we could start generating income from Archbishop's Palace and how quickly the work at Granada House could be completed. Obviously, at the moment, both of those sites aren't generating any revenue, but both cases we've got plans in place. Archbishop's Palace, we're looking for a new tenant. At Granada House, work on the refurbishment is about to kick off. So, I mean, these are, I hope, just temporary issues. On the KCC elections point, you're correct, and I must come back to you on that, because you're absolutely right. There shouldn't be any variance. We recover all of our costs for KCC elections, so there oughtn't to be a variance there. It may be that it's a timing issue, but yeah, clearly, if we run a KCC by-election as we did earlier this year, then we cover the costs from KCC. And on the new posts, are you referring to the posts at the bottom of page 31?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in both cases, we're not increasing the budget. We're just moving within an overall heading. So if I explain what I mean by that in relation to the two of them, first of all, we've always had the budget for the Gypsy and Traveller sites, but what we've done this year is we've brought the management in-house. So whereas previously we were paying KCC to run the sites, we've now recruited a Traveller site manager. So what that environment is, it's not growth, it's just switching money from a budget for payment to KCC for management of them to the employment of somebody in-house to do that. So it's not growth in that sense. And similarly with housing and inclusion, we've been able to attract grant funding for our work around homelessness, which we've put into this reserve homelessness prevention on temporary accommodation reserve. What we're doing here is we're just pulling that money out of the reserve to fund posts, but it's money that we always had. It's not new money that we're conjuring up in the budget. Hopefully that's clear.
I can understand in terms of those posts. Okay, I can see the first one. We employed a body via KCC. We no longer employ a body via KCC. We employ our own, so it's on post. On the second one, there's a slight contradiction in a sense of what John was telling us about our reserves, and I agree wholeheartedly. We've got to keep our reserves to the highest level we can do. We don't have to look at, unfortunately, what's happened in Birmingham and the impact that's going to have, and what could happen yet in places like in KCC and elsewhere, where big authorities are facing massive drains on their resources. We're lucky that we have in total just under £30 million in our reserves. But this one, be it only £77,500, we're funding posts from those reserves we've outlined on page 36. Because if you go through that list, it's about halfway down, as you say, it's the homeless prevention temporary accommodation, and that reserve at the beginning of the current financial year was £1.124 million. We've used £135,000 of it to date, which presumably includes this figure. So at the year end, it's going to be £989,000. I suppose my concern is if we're funding posts from reserves, when that particular reserve, say, runs out, okay, at that rate, you've got a decade, but when that does run out, what do we do with the jobs? Do we axe them? Or, because it comes to the point which we had quite a discussion at the budget process when we set this budget, of using reserves to fund jobs. And the fact that if you pay for, in the planning service in particular, let alone the pay award, but if we use that to fund jobs in any description, your ability to sustain that is only as good as your amount of reserves. And if you're not careful, you're just putting down on your reserves to pay for jobs. And this might only be a couple of posts here, but it's the same argument as if it's a couple of posts or hundreds of posts. If we're actually not funding jobs from our revenue resources, it's not sustainable in the long term, precisely as John was saying. So I'd just like to flag up, that I think there has to be a bit of a concern when we're looking at a budget going forward, that we don't get into the habit of using any varmints from reserves to fund a job, because, I say it just seems against, if you like, the spirit of the way we wanted to do our budget. So that's, I don't know if you want to come back on that before I go on to my capital points. Looks like you do.
Yeah, Councillor Harper, with respect, I don't think you've understood, and it may be our fault in how we've presented the numbers. This is an earmarked reserve. What happens is that if we get a grant from the government for homelessness and we don't spend it, then we put it in this reserve. But it's not unallocated reserve. It's not a general reserve. It's money that we must spend for that purpose. Now, that's the reason why it's perfectly legitimate to spend it that way. On your other point, what happens when the grant from central government runs out? We are confident, because we've had generous funding from government for several years for our homelessness initiatives, that we can continue to employ those staff for certainly the period of the medium-term financial plan. You're right, it would be irresponsible to take on staff if we couldn't guarantee them a job for a reasonable period of time. But we are absolutely confident that that's not an issue here.
Okay. In which case, can I ask that in future, when we get the quarter 2 reports, that the equivalent to page 36, so that's part D, reserves and balances, splits the earmarked reserves between those funded by a government grant and others, because fair enough, what the homeless prevention and temporary accommodation is a government grant which was given to us, which we're calling down. But the spatial planning, neighbourhood planning, those aren't. My understanding is those are what we agreed to take out of our reserves to fund particular jobs. They're not money we're getting from the government. I think whilst they might be earmarked, I think some of these earmarked items are monies which came from government grants and monies which we decided to effectively to designate. And I might be wrong on that, but that was, looking at it, because we did agree to spend, hundreds of thousands of pounds on planning from our, our reserves. When we did set the budget, is that what that top line is, for instance?
Yes, and certainly, Councillor Harper, some of these earmarked reserves derive from government grant, others from different sources, so happy to distinguish them in that way.
That would be helpful, thank you. Sorry, it's a bit of
Sorry, Councillor Harper. Councillor Webb's indicated, is it relevant specifically to this point that Councillor Harper is discussing, or was it a more general point afterwards? I just think before Councillor Harper went on to his next point, if yours is relevant to this, perhaps we should come to you first and then back to Councillor.
Okay, so going on to the capital. So this is part B, pages 32 and 33, where you rightly, John, mentioned about items of slippage. Now, if we look at all those myriad of items, there's three really significant ones. And there's one, the first one you mentioned was 1,000 affordable homes, where we had hoped, where we planned to spend £8.6 million this year. It looks like we're going to end up spending under half of that, because it's saying that our projected slippage at this stage to the next year is just under £4.7 million. And I think that has to be, it'd be, we must have quite concerns on that, when I think elsewhere it says we've already bought about 40%, I think it was, of the sites we need to do the affordable housing. So we've actually land banked already a large proportion of the sites we need. And if we're slipping at this stage, then, we're building potential problems in for ourselves in terms of, if we don't have the affordable houses coming on the stream, then our temporary housing budgets are going up, because part of the solution for homelessness is having the council's 1,000 affordable homes. So I'd be interested to understand a bit on that. The next really significant one is a £2.6 million on leisure provision. Now, I think that's the minor works which were to be done to the leisure centre. Yeah, that's what it was. Claudine said they were slipping. And then ironically, the other really significant one links back to what's been a theme tonight, which is biodiversity and climate change, where we had a budget to spend this year of just under £3 million, and we're planning to roll forward already £2.1 million. And I suppose that one, in a sense, both, the 1,000 affordable homes is a really significant thing that we're perhaps off track on that. But the biodiversity thing, when we've got this 2030 deadline, is potentially, and it links in with the whole issue why we want more reporting on it, because we're just, if we're only going to spend a few £100,000 this year, it's against almost £3 million. We're never going to get to carbon neutrality and that sort of progress in, I say, 6.5 years is when we've actually achieved carbon neutrality. If you're doing capital projects, you've got to get them completed prior to that to actually get there. So that's some concerns, I think, on capital. And then my last one was actually the risk register. Yeah, there's a lot of information there, and I haven't had a chance to digest it all, but I did note that on the risk around housing, which is on page 59 of our pack, that if you like, the gross risk before we do anything is 20, and then after mitigation it's 16. Well, I'm wondering, after mitigation, shouldn't it be higher than 16, near almost 20, given that we're reporting an £800,000 overspend on temporary accommodation after only 3 months into a financial year? Now, I'm not saying we're not doing all those mitigating factors, but the nature of this issue is not one we can control, is it? Homelessness and people being made homeless and presenting themselves to the council completely beyond our control. We can have all these sort of plans in place, which obviously we have a lot in place, but then if for whatever reason beyond our control, 3 times the number of people come and knock on the door at Maidstone House and present themselves as homeless, it wouldn't have mattered how much mitigation we tried to do, because we couldn't have stopped the people coming. And it's, we've experienced as an authority this over a number of years, where we keep having to, and it's, having to increase the budget for homelessness because we can't control it, and more people are presenting themselves to us. Now, I can remember there was a discussion not that long ago around this and about whether we're seeing a sort of tail off of some of the impacts of COVID, where people couldn't have tenancies curtailed, cost of living pressures, and so on. And so I just find it a bit surprising to see that we think the mitigation is actually reducing the risk. We can do all the mitigation factors we like, but I think the risk is still 20 afterwards, because it's completely out of our control. If it was in our control, we wouldn't be projecting an £800,000 overspend, which, when you look at the whole size of our budget, is enormous. Right.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. In relation to the questions, first of all, the slippage on the Affordable Homes Programme. As you say, it is a major programme. We've made good progress on securing sites, but the process of getting planning permission, lining up contractors, all of those kind of things is complex and time consuming. And I can assure you work is going on those. The timetable has slipped a bit from what's in the budget, but it's certainly well underway in relation to the major schemes, particularly at Maidstone East and the old Springfield Library. You flag up about the slippage on biodiversity and climate change. I think the point I'd like to make on that is that although we have a capital budget, it's important that we use it intelligently. For example, we can get even more bang for our buck by securing matching funding, and we're looking to do that with the capital works on our buildings. So it doesn't make sense, if we can access external funding, to just go ahead and spend the money that's in the budget. I know in this case, with funding to decarbonise our buildings, we're using that money that's in the budget to match money that we're hoping to get from central government. So there's a good reason for not spending it. It's not just inertia. And finally, your point about risk, I'll bring in either Cathy Woodward or Uche Olufemi, who produced this report, but I know that the assessment of the risk around housing is based on an assessment by William Cornell as the relevant director. So maybe if I could call on my colleagues to answer that one particularly.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Can I please ask what the question was again, please, Councillor Harper?
My question was that the housing pressures have, if you like, a current risk before doing anything of 20, and we're suggesting that after the mitigating factors listed in the risk register, that the risk drops to 16. And I suppose I'm saying that given that we can't control the number of people presenting themselves as homeless to the council, that even though we have mitigating actions in place, they don't overall reduce the size of the risk, because our finance forecasting is suggesting an £800,000 overspend on this item for this current financial year.
Yes. The reason why that has come up, because there is a big difference between when the risk itself was identified and all of the numerous measures that have been put in place to mitigate the risk. So it's not only the cost of it as well, it's also other items. If I go down, bear with me. So it's a lot of the actions. Yes, that's everything that has been put in place, from identifying, having in place staff who are going to support the process of dealing with homelessness, to the funding for it and all of the things. So if in a situation, I know that it does sound like, yes, there's still a lot of money going into it, but money isn't the only risk in it. There is definitely a difference where some measures have been put in place after identification of the risk. And speaking to William and speaking to John Littlemo and all of the other officers involved as well, it was a unanimous decision that yes, this rating is suitable for this risk at this time.
I mean, there's not much I can say, is there? If that's what, you know, I mean, I can understand the methodology you use, it's laid out, what the officers have come to the view on, but I'm just suggesting the committee might like to request more looked into on this item. It's just that the mitigation, the planned action, so the first one, and I don't disagree with what we've got, but it's about the 1,000 affordable homes. Okay, so part of the mitigation on the homelessness is our 1,000 affordable homes, which we've just heard, for a number of reasons, is behind target. Yeah, we're £4.5 million behind target, which is about 50% of the spend to date. So whilst, you know, I'm sure we will get to 1,000 affordable homes, if you like, rather than getting them, I don't know, I'd say arbitrary, in 5 years, it might take 8 or 9 years to get there. So yes, you can say we will get those, but you know, it's the time scale as well has an impact. So I'm just, yeah. I mean, you've given us the facts and the figures as you and your other officers have looked at it. I'm just saying I think we've been a bit optimistic, and it doesn't seem to tie up with the other reporting we've had presented to us tonight. So anyway.
So Mark Green has just indicated there, so I'm going to let him speak, then I will come to you, Councillor Webb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Harper, I just wanted to say that so far as this report is concerned, it's looking at corporate risks and looking at them in relation to one another and the overall corporate situation. If you were interested in exploring the detail behind this risk, given it's to do with housing, I'd suggest probably the HHE pack is the right place to be doing that.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Webb has waited very patiently there, so I'm going to come to him next, please.
It's just on this point, really, and a lot of my concerns been completely taken away by Mr. Green by saying it should go to Chi and not here. But this is linking to funding and money, and I understand what you've said to us tonight in terms of this is an officer process, and the mechanisms behind the officer process, I wouldn't say are hidden, but they're not clear. Now, that may be my ignorance, but I do think a better explanation of why the risk has dropped would be more helpful. And that's all I want to say on it. A better explanation, really, because I agree with what Councillor Harper has said, but I still don't understand why the risk has dropped. Again, I don't want to labour that, but it'd be helpful if the wording could help us non-professionals in Maidstone House understand the process and the progress that officers are making.
Or would you like to come back on that one?
No, I'm saying, well, that is noted. Like Mark said, definitely I'll probably find out a bit more, but then come back to members with some more wording.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any other comments on well, either on that point or generally? Okay, Councillor Webb.
Sorry, if you could bear with me. I do find it annoying, as Councillor Harper has said, that the papers only arrived today, because I'm scrabbling around from page to page because I haven't had time to make copious notes. The 2 points I want a better explanation on in future is that Maidstone House and Granada House, particularly Granada House, and as I was the Cabinet Member for Housing last year, we took a decision to move forward to refurbish the whole of Granada House. Now that was known, and it was known very early that that was going to be what was going to be agreed. Okay, so why one, if I call it a directorate, can't talk to another directorate at Maidstone House, i.e. housing, talk to finance early and say, we're not going to get this rental income in because we know this is going to happen, and therefore we have a debt of £200,000. I found that quite frankly unfathomable. The second point is on Maidstone House. You know, £200,000 drop because we haven't done the work in Maidstone House. Again, we've had Maidstone House for 2 years now. And if there was a forward plan, which had an action plan, which had smart targets in it to ensure that by a certain date we had rental income coming in, but before that happens, we need to do X, Y, and Z in Maidstone House, then I don't understand why we are so far behind. Those are those 2 points. I do understand now a little bit clearer from what Mr. Green has said about the environments of the Traveller site manager and the funding the post for housing and inclusion. My point is a better explanation in these papers would have been more helpful to us, please. Okay, on that, sorry if I can bear with me as I go on. Don't mean to go on and on and on. Again, the deficit on temporary housing. Yes, the monies are likely to increase because of the pressure within the general public and more people coming forward wanting temporary accommodation. I think what would be a good solution to reduce that deficit, and I'm sure you have it in hand, is the interest that we are earning on the money we are not spending on the 1,000 houses could be directly wired across to that deficit, because that's the vast majority, I think, of where we're going with the budget deficit. So I think the answer is relatively simple with that, because it's housing paying for housing. Again, I don't know the complexities. I'm not an accountant, but I think that would be an easy win, because everybody would then understand it. if we come onto the risk register, well, blow me down, really. Again, I'm stunned on page 58. You know, that first bullet point on that top of that page, and I'm sorry to harp on, comprehensive biodiversity and climate change strategy and action plan has been developed. Will blow me down. What was the first part of this meeting all about? And is being implemented across the council. Well, I want to challenge that statement, because if it is, then we're working to an action plan which is inept, and I will use that word advisedly. So that's a challenge going forward, because I think some of this work in terms of the risk register, you've used statements which are inaccurate. That is one. The second one, which is a point I think that needs to be raised on a regular basis. The last bullet point states very clearly the pressure on residents of this borough in terms of cost of living crisis, in terms of homelessness increasing, resident debt increasing, increasing stress and mental health problems. And it's on that last point we need to be very, very careful on how we allocate funding in the Borough Council. And although I take Councillor Perry's point about an £11 million, what is it? General reserve, thank you very much. In this paper, it says actually the recommendation is a £4 million. What's that word again? Sorry? Yes, the minimum. Okay. I understand we want more than that. No, I haven't finished making the point, if you don't mind. You're stating there £11.386 million reserve, got the word now. I think some serious work needs to be done on analysing what we are doing to support residents who have increased stress and mental health problems, because KCC are reducing their care, they're reducing their support for residents who have mental health issues. We know that because their budgets are being reduced significantly. So therefore, as a borough council, we should be looking seriously at increasing what we do to support our residents. So that needs to be challenged, because I don't agree. I just really can't see how a series of officers in Maidstone House can reduce the current rating from 16 down to 12 when there are statements saying we've got increases here, increases there, increases everywhere, but actually we're reducing the risk. I think that is an utter nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Green, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll see if Councillor Perry wants to comment on the last one. Just on the ones about Maidstone House and Granada House. On Granada House, I agree we were incorrect in anticipating that we'd be able to start generating income again so soon. On Maidstone House, yes, in an ideal world, we would have had tenants in place sooner. It is the case, though, that as we've been marketing Maidstone House to potential tenants, the nature of the accommodation that potential tenants require has become clearer, and whereas previously we thought we might be able to let the whole of the fourth floor as one lease, the demand in the market is for much smaller units, which means that we have to spend money splitting out the space. I mean, in the end, we're still very optimistic about being able to let out the space, but we've got to fit it out in a way that will be attractive to our our potential tenants. Absolutely take the point about a better explanation of the environments. I'll take that away and we'll provide that information next time. On the risk register, first on the biodiversity and climate change, I don't think there's anything really further given, as you say, the discussion that's already taken place on that item. On the final risk about the cost of living crisis, I mean, this is really about, from a strategic point of view, how the council allocates its resources. And I don't know whether you want to say anything on that, Councillor Perry.
I don't. Yeah. Our finances are here to support the services that we provide to our residents. If we end up like some councils, I'll repeat what I say, I may sound boring, but I'm going to carry on repeating it. If we end up with a sort of financial disaster that a lot of councils have, where they thought it was a good idea that their residents reduce their council tax, support out of their reserves, and they ended up in a Section 114. There's a whole load of them have done it. And quite frankly, a few counties not too far away from here who are damn well close to it as well. We all know that. So first of all, we're here to provide a good service to our residents. That's what they want. They want their bins collected properly. They want a good contract, not a bad contract where half the bins don't get collected. And we've seen a few examples of that around this county as well. So what we're here to do and what our residents want is a good service from this council. Now, it gets that by keeping our finances and our resources in place to do it. And that's how I feel very strongly about this. I heard a comment about, our reserves could go down to 4 million. That is a disaster area. Yes, it's the minimum. And quite frankly, it's ridiculous even to suggest it. We have a reserves, our balance sheet and our borrowing are judged on our soundness of our balance sheet. Chairman, you must know that from your training. It's the same as mine, I think. If you don't have a sound balance sheet, you don't get the borrowing, and no one will lend you any bloody money anyway. Excuse my language. So we're here to provide service. Our residents, residents will not thank us if this council gets into a financial difficulty. It's as simple as that. And I feel very, very strongly about that, and I'll keep on repeating it. If Councillor Webb doesn't agree with me, he doesn't agree with me, but I'll stand by what I say on that. That's our service to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I don't know why Councillor Perry is getting so excited. I did not say that we could move to a £4 million reserve. I did not say that. So please don't come across the table attacking me, saying that is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. That wasn't what I was suggesting. What I was suggesting was that because there is increased need for our residents in the areas in which the officers have described in the risk assessment, it would be worthwhile considering and putting forward a recovery for some of our residents that are in need. I'm not suggesting that we look at spending copious amounts of reserves, but as he has already stated a number of times tonight, we are here for our residents. And if he doesn't like suggestions that are being made on how we can support our residents, then I'm sorry, you'll have to get over it, because I am here to support the residents of Maidstone. And if we need to put more support in by making cuts elsewhere so it doesn't affect our reserves, then that's what we should do. Thank you.
Yeah, if you'd like to come back quickly there, because Councillor Gucci is waiting. So yeah, I'll let you.
Can I just pour a little bit of, is it oil on troubled waters? I'm not quite sure. But just let's get out of the playground for a minute. I think that there is such a very sound reason for us to have healthy finance, a healthy balance sheet. And I fully support everything that Councillor Perry has said. That said, we do have to be very careful, not just to defend that position, but to make it very clear about what we are already doing for our residents. Let's give more publicity or make members more aware about the roadshows that we've been doing, the way we've been working with all sorts of various utility companies to try to bring the cost of living down. We are already doing things, and I think there's a great danger that we'll start getting into arguments as to why or why not we should or shouldn't put up the council tax. The council tax is going to go up, because if it doesn't, we're going to be in Queer Street. However, there are other ways that we are already helping our residents. Funnily enough, I've just put a notice up, or rather, I've just taken it down from our parish, my local parish notice board, because of the not Fremlin Centre. What's the other one we've got? Used to be Stoneborough. Sorry, it's the heat gets to my brain. Thank you. The mall. We've been holding some helpful workshops there for residents to find out how they can help to control their budget. So let's just bear that in mind. Can we move on, please, Chairman?
Yes, well, I'm going to let Councillor Perry come back, but as stated, I do think it's right we should move on. And
No, thank you, Councillor Gooch, because we do a lot to help our residents. We have a council tax reduction scheme for starters, which this council has thoroughly endorsed, and that's very, very important. We have a strong community liaison between the parishes and other communities as well, which we work closely together. Of course, we do all that, and it's all part of the services that this council provides, and we always are conscious for our residents. You don't have a monopoly of that, Councillor Webb, with due respect. We all have that. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Perry. Are there any other comments on this? Okay, so can I move that the report be noted sort of as per the papers? Is that seconded? Councillor Gooch, I think, was slightly quicker there. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Excellent, thank you.
Because I'm just conscious of what we said about the minutes, is that the points we raised in discussion this evening are covered in the minutes when it says the members raised, okay? So I'm not saying change what the recommendation is, but I'm just saying all the various points which have been raised, as long as they're, referenced in the minutes, then the cabinet and then anyone else looking at it will know the points we were bringing up.
I have been reliably informed that yes, they will be included in the minutes. Thank you. Right, thank you, members. Item 11, the medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals. Again, I'd like this to be introduced by Councillor Perry, the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's been a very good briefing session on this particular issue, which I know some of you have attended. Unfortunately, I would have attended myself, but I was on holiday at the time, so I couldn't make it. But I just wanted to say that the medium-term financial strategy is one of the most important things that we have to endorse and carry out, actually, because it's the bedrock, really, of all the work that we do, and it sets out the basic financial framework for moving forward. And without it, we would be unable to provide our services, something we've already been talking about. But we have to live within our means, and we have a statutory obligation to provide a balanced budget for 2024-25. And as you can see, we are in a very challenging situation, which is why we took the view to address the situation as early as possible. And this is why we've done a lot of work already to come up with a good solution as early as possible. Some of it we can't do towards the end of the year, and I'll come back to that. But basically, we are in a much more forward position than we have been in previous years, and I think that is very, very important. First, there are two key assumptions that I want to make in this MTFS. The first is that we will increase the council tax by the referendum limit. That is one of the assumptions that's in the paper and it's up front. It is currently 3%. I do recognise this is not popular, and particularly with some of my fellow councillors, I'm sure, and it's not particularly popular with me, to be perfectly honest. But I think, and with the cost of living as it is, we do recognise that any increase is not likely to be popularly received. But nevertheless, with inflation as it currently is, this may sound technical, but a 3% increase actually is, in real terms, a reduction, of course. And the point I think we make is that, given the current forecasts of expenditure, this increase is pretty well, in my view, certainly as it reads at the moment, is pretty well an essential, quite frankly. If the council is to continue providing its services. Secondly, the overall income from fees and charges will increase by 5%. That is an assumption. It doesn't mean individual fees and charges will necessarily go up by 5%. Some may go up more, some may not go up at all. I suppose some might even reduce, but I think that's pretty unlikely, to be perfectly honest. But nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that overall, the assumption of income generated will increase by 5%. And I know there are arguments about how that should be done, and I fully understand there are different views on this. Fees and charges will not be finalised until towards the end of the year. If you turn to page 81, and I think this is a pretty important table actually, because in some ways it's really does highlight the issues. It looks at the 5 years, and I think based on the savings outline, and they are outlined on pages 107 to 109, we should be in a position to produce a balanced budget for 2024-25. I'm pretty confident we can do that. But, and here's the but, what follows is going to be very difficult. Because as you can see from the table, you move from a 0.9 million deficit to 4.5 million. And that, by anybody's standards, is going to be very, very, very challenging. Now, clearly these are forecasts. I'm not saying they're the final thing, but they are pretty well, I think it's a very good guide and a very good trend, and they've been very carefully prepared by Mark and his team, and I have total confidence in what they've done. So I think what I'm really saying is that the MTFS as it stands, I believe we can balance the budget for 24-25. There are savings outlined. I think they are reasonable, and some people have different views on which emphasis should be put, but I do think they are achievable. Looking further to the future, we're going to have to do a lot more work, and that will take us into the realms of next year, obviously, and the future. So I think I would probably leave it at there. The other thing I would say is the risk analysis, which we've already discussed a lot already, so I won't repeat it. But clearly, financial uncertainty still remains a key issue, and it's something we again need to monitor it very, very carefully. But we need clearly to be in a position where we are able to provide a budget, a balanced budget for 24-25, which is our initial and first priority, because that is our statutory obligation, and we must be able to do that. And I believe, as I said before, we are in a pretty good position to do it. Thank you. But one other point I would make, the capital budget, again, won't be finalised until very early next year. That is partly because, and this is the other big risk, which I should have mentioned, is we don't know what the funding from the government will be. And so we need to, and that normally comes in December, which is often very late. So we need to know what their views on the referendum limit and whether there will be any other funding available as well, or grants available. So that they're two important provisos that we need to take into consideration. And that's why the capital budget will not be finalised until early next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I think this is I think quite a well laid out report. We've seen at this committee, if you like, the preliminary reports. I think at our last meeting when we were discussing this, that we would actually go ahead with this early stage on the process. So it's good that we can see in one place now all the proposals from which have been through all the packs, including us. Because if we look at the table on table 7 on page 102, as you say, John, we need to find £900,000 roughly in terms of savings for next financial year. And I went through and quickly added up the appendices from this committee and the other policy advisories, and if we were to do all of the items there, they come to a net figure of just under £1.6 million. So that would, on the face of it, seem to give us definitely the £0.9 million needed, plus a very significant buffer, which hopefully would pick up the point you said earlier to the revenue account. The current year we're looking to probably overspend by just under £300,000. I mean, it was 274, wasn't it? So looking at this, my understanding would be that if we were to do all of this, we would be able to accommodate that as well. Going forward, I think, as you say, to 25-26 is when you fall off the cliff, because the gap goes up to £4.5 million. Now, I've got a question on that. I've read through the report, and we had the discussion, I know, at our last meeting, but I just wanted to check, is part of the reason in the assumptions in this projection, which leads to that considerably increased deficit in 25-26, linked to the revenue contribution needed for the affordable housing subsidy? It is. I thought that was the case. Okay, so there's a big assumption there, isn't there? If we were to receive one-off funding, as we did this year, last year, which we put £3 million into that fund. So if with next year's budget, we won't know until Christmas, as John was said, but if there is the one-off monies again, we might have £3 million we could allocate from that, which might presumably mean we wouldn't need to take out, these millions of pounds we've effectively identified here. Is that the right sort of understanding? Or?
Not quite, Councillor Harper, because you're right to say that the £4.5 million arises partly because of the affordable housing programme, but it's not the subsidy that's required. That is accounted for separately. No, the sense in which the £4.5 million arises partly because of the affordable housing programme is because we are anticipating that in 25-26 we'll have borrowing costs that we will incur because we're drawing down the first tranche of borrowing starting at the beginning of 25-26. And the other thing that contributes to that big jump in the budget gap is the fact that we know that at some point, whether it's 25-26 or later, there will be a reset of local government funding, and that will hit us most likely through the proportion of business rates that we can retain. At the moment, we retain about 10% of the business rates we collect. If the government, and it wouldn't necessarily be this government, could be a future government, if it wants to rejig local authority financing to redirect more money towards upper tier authorities or to the north of England, that would mean taking away money from the likes of us, unfortunately.
Thank you. I was going to say, that's a good explanation. I was going to say it's unhelpful in the sense that I was hoping that I might, there might have been something which could have eased our problems. Obviously not if it's going to be the debt charge implication. The other question, two other points. One, I know I hear that the capital programme at the moment is all very draft and so on. I understand that. But presumably when you do update the capital programme, we're looking to all the sort of underspends we've got for the current year, all those projections to roll all of that money forward. Because I'm just conscious this thing at the moment adds up on the capital programme at £201 million. Obviously, when we roll it forward an extra year, there'll be an extra year's worth of growth. But if we're not actually on track to spend the just under £40 million this year, and as we went through that earlier, there's large items where we're clearly not going to. We need to make sure that those figures are added to the sort of 24, 25 column at the relevant time, because otherwise we'll end up not having the money for some of those schemes. And my last point, and then I'm going to make a slight amendment to the recommendations, if that's okay, Chair, was there's 3 savings for us, which 2 of which I've got quite a big point on, which I'll look at. We'll go to those first. So page 75, we've got the 2 biodiversity change growth items, which we've discussed the whole issue of biodiversity. I think at this stage it might be premature for us to recommend those 2 items of growth prior to receiving the report John's undertaken to give to us at a committee which, a fairly imminent committee, because until we've got that, we don't know if creating these posts here is going to help with actually delivering a climate change action plan to get us to net zero in 6 years' time or not. And so I'd be hesitant about employing the energy officer and then doing this other work until we know that they meet what we believe we seriously can deliver in a biodiversity plan. So I would suggest that when we come to agree the recommendations, that presumably it's on point A, because it says set out in Appendix B be approved, and we'd need to have wording, something like, with the exception of the 2 items of biodiversity and climate change, which need further review by the committee in conjunction with a further report on the biodiversity and climate change action plan. Just so it's clear that we're recommending everything else here except those 2 items of growth which we want further consideration of when we receive a more robust biodiversity and climate action plan. And then, thank you. And then my final, and it's a point, it was just on the item on Heather House. It's just a question. Okay, I can see what we're going to do here with the new community centre, but I just wanted to check, because quite often, if you don't put any resource in, obviously we'll be paying for the new Heather House for community. But if we're not going to, on a regular basis, be contributing to running costs or any other type of support to it, I'm trying to understand what we're saying here. Does that mean that in terms of the community governance of Heather House, that the council and the communities in Park Wood will have limited input into how the thing's used in the future? So that might be a question no one could answer here tonight, but if not, perhaps someone could just send that through to me, because I'm just wanting to understand that by agreeing that proposal, that we're not, if you like, weakening community input into the future management of Heather House.
So I'm going to take the last point sort of first. Can that be emailed through? Is that possible?
I can probably go one better actually, to clarify that when the decision was made to replace Heather House, it was always envisaged that a new operator would take it over. Now, the terms of the agreement with the new operator will set out things like what services they should provide for the local community and so on. And we will be advertising that opportunity. Clearly, we hope that there will be people from the voluntary sector coming forward who want to take on Heather House. But the details of what obligations are in there about what they should do will be part of the agreement with the new operator.
Lovely, thank you. Right, and then we have an amendment which Councillor Gooch has seconded. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Gooch? No? Okay, so I had Councillor Cannon next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Harper sort of mentioned the key point that I wanted to talk about, which was the growth items on the in the papers on 75. And I actually support the recommendation. I mean, perhaps for slightly different reasons. I mean, but I'm happy to support and vote along Councillor Harper has proposed. But I did want to just ask one point of clarification on the £49,000. When I've seen new roles over the last few years, that £49,000, is that actually what is the actual longer term cost in terms of pension contributions? Is that calculated at some point? Because I presume that's just sort of an annual salary. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is salary plus the on costs, employer national insurance, pension contributions, and this would be a change to the base budget. So that'll be 49,000 for every year into the future. So that will cover paying that person for the future starting in 24-25.
Yeah, just briefly. And so, I mean, that's good. Thank you. And then in terms of the £30,000 growth for the Eco Hub, I mean, we found some funds for the Eco Hub. So again, I sort of part wonder why we need to increase the budget item, because clearly ad hoc money can be found for good initiatives. So I'm just wondering if that status quo is actually better. And that's part of my reasoning as well of perhaps supporting the proposal, even though maybe Paul, Councillor Gooch and Councillor Harper aren't proposing it for that reason.
Thank you. Can I just confirm, Councillor Harper, Councillor Gooch, you're moving that we accept the recommendations subject to that amendment, or are you suggesting that as a whole amendment?
I was moving that we accept recommendations 1 and 2, but with recommendation 1 being amended so that it says after that full stop, with the exception of the 2 items of biodiversity and climate change, which need further review by the committee in conjunction with a further report on the biodiversity and climate change action plan.
Thank you.
But other than that, the rest of it, I think everyone's happy. Yeah,
thank you.
Happy. Okay.
Councillor Thompson.
Can I just check with you, Mr. Chairman? Are we returning now to general questions and points about this item?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. I would like to recall a remark made by Councillor Perry a long time ago now. You paid a compliment to Mr. Green and officers in general for information about this in this report, and Councillor Harper has made a compliment about the way in which the information is laid out, and I'm happy with that. Subject to that acknowledgement, I do still find, and this reflects my being a newcomer here, that there is much brevity in this report, and I'm left with many questions about what we are being told and information going on behind the scenes. I note comments made by Councillor Webb and Councillor Harper, who I understand to be extremely experienced in this council, that they dug around for some time in the conversation in order to gain some of that detail. I take note of that. So against that background, I'm concerned that with regard to, and I'm going to give just three examples, and I shall try to be brief. So just to give three examples as exemplifying this larger issue, if I've understood them correctly, and you will enlighten me, I'm sure, if necessary. It seems to me that parking in the town has been subsidised without inflation level increases having been applied for a 2-year period. This, it seems to me, would have paid for some of the discontinued park and ride services that we no longer benefit from, that those who aren't able to afford town centre parking charges would have benefited from. I see one of the saving figures in this report is of £100,000 for the Allington Park and Ride site, if I've understood it correctly. That is, both of those two things are risks of different sorts to those that Councillor Perry has rightly pointed to. I take your point about balancing the budget. I understand that, but these decisions mean that other risks, human risks, atmospheric risks, the good processes of transport and travel in our town become risks. So that's the first example. Councillor Harper has already mentioned Heather House. It seems to me that there is a risk that while I understand that the new building won't have as many costs attached to it, and I understand that SIL money, I believe, is being sent in that direction, it seems that there is a risk in this brief statement here that the risk of maintaining the funding for the social community service is being set against the maintenance costs, which are being outsourced as well as the service, if I've understood it correctly. The third and final example I will give is, and Councillor Perry and I have exchanged thoughts about the rubbish collection bin service before, and I take some of his points on board. Nevertheless, we are now in a situation where residents are writing to me and other councillors complaining that there is a great lack of clarity about why it is that they're being charged for bins which 1 minute are theirs and the next minute are not. They're being broken, and the residents are being charged, and they're quite irate about it. The lack of detail and
Thank you. Would you care to come back on that, Mark Green?
Yeah, I hope I can clarify those points for Councillor Thompson. The reference to parking, I think you're referring to the item on page 110, which is actually something that was considered by the Pied Pack, not strictly speaking within the remit of this one, but it is correct to say that because of the end of the park and ride scheme, this is saying that we would save a further 100,000. There were already savings from deleting park and ride in previous years, but we've identified this extra 100,000 that you've pointed out there. The next point was about Heather House, where we're saying we're going to save 27,000. And yes, that does mean that we're looking to the voluntary sector in some way or another to pick up those costs. But we are investing a huge amount of money in a brand new community centre. So all of the capital costs of the community centre are being borne by the council. It seemed reasonable that the revenue costs would be picked up by the new operator. And the final thing about bins, I think you're referring to something that was actually agreed as part of last year's budget, whereby last year and council did agree this, and there would be a charge for replacement bins, and so that's not really something that is at issue so far as this report is concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Perry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I suspect I'm the only person in this room who actually came into this meeting by a bus. Did anybody else use the bus services? No, a lot of shaking of heads here. Well, I did. So, you know, it's one of the issues we have, that the bus service to me are very important. One of the reasons I do have a sight problem, as many of you know, and so I can't drive, so I am dependent on the buses. I'd like to see more buses. I would. But the trouble is that they cost money, cost subsidies from, we know that, so it comes out of the public purse as well. So there's a balance between all these things that we have to judge. And it's the same with the park and ride, to be perfectly honest. I understand exactly what point you're making, but it costs a lot of money, and it was, at the time, it wasn't well utilised. And that's the issue we have of all these things. And when we're looking at our finances, this is the judgment we do seriously have to make. We have to be realistic in a lot of our judgments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I've got Councillor Hinder next, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick comment that I think has been said. You have to strike a balance. And whilst we could say, yes, we'll put the parking charges up and get more money, but at the same time, we are trying to encourage people to come to Maidstone. We're trying to encourage an increase in the footfall. And you can't have one without the other. So often people say, oh, I'm not going to go so-and-so. Look at all the car parking charges. I'll go to Lakeside or wherever, down to Ashford, where they don't charge me. You know, so it's striking a balance, and that's, I think, something we need to keep in mind.
I completely agree. Are there any other points on this item? No, so we have a motion or an amendment. Do I need to do is that the recommendations agreed as per, but with Councillor Harper's amendments? Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Excellent. Great. Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, members. I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you. Good night. Okay.